The sky above the Seireitei did not just break open. It burned. There was no warning from the Department of Research and Development, and no shifting in the spirit particles that usually signaled an intruder. 1 second. The afternoon sun was shining over the white walls of the noble district, and the next second, the clouds boiled away. The barrier that protected the Soul Reapers, a wall of energy that had stood for centuries against armies and hollows, evaporated instantly. It did not shatter like glass. It melted like plastic thrown into a furnace. A column of golden light slammed into the earth near the Squad 1 barracks. The impact was silent for a heartbeat, because the sound was too loud for the air to carry. Then the shockwave hit. Tile roofs across the entire central city turned into dust. Windows blew out 3 miles away. The ground rolled like ocean waves. Lesser Soul Reapers fell to their knees not because of the shaking, but because of the pressure. It was not spiritual pressure as they knew it. It did not feel like a ghost or a hollow. It felt like the weight of a dying star. It was hot and angry and alive. In the center of the crater, where the golden light had touched down, the stone was glowing red. Smoke rose in a thick black pillar. Lieutenant Chojiro Sasakiba was the first to reach the edge of the pit. He was a man who had seen wars for 1,000 years. He had stood by the captain commander while mountains were carved apart. But when he looked into the hole, his hands shook. There was a boy in the fire. He looked small. He wore purple clothes that were torn and stained with dark blood. His hair stood up in jagged golden spikes, and lightning crackled around his small body. The lightning was not natural. It was blue and violent, and it snapped against the rocks, turning them to ash. The boy was screaming. It was a raw, broken sound. He had his hands cupped at his side as if he were holding a heavy ball. He was shouting a name that Chojiro did not know. He was shouting for his father. The air around the boy was so dense that Chojiro could not step forward. The spiritual pressure of the captains arriving behind him felt like nothing compared to the dense, crushing heat coming from this child. Captain Commander Yamamoto landed next. The old man's eyes were narrow. He gripped his wooden cane until the wood groaned. He felt the heat. It rivaled his own flames. This was not a technique from the Soul Society. This was a living disaster. The boy in the pit stopped screaming and fell forward. The golden hair faded instantly to black. The blue lightning vanished. The crushing weight lifted, leaving only the smell of ozone and burnt earth. The boy lay face down in the dirt. He looked like any other human child now, small and broken and bleeding. But the captains standing on the rim of the crater did not move. They had felt the monster inside the skin. They knew that the peace of the Seireitei had just ended. The boy twitched once and whispered a final apology to a man who was not there. Then he went still. Far away in the sensory tower, the warning alarms finally began to ring, wailing too late to save anyone from the truth that had just landed in their backyard. The world had changed. The smoke from the crater had not even cleared before the arguments began. Captain Retsu Unohana stood over the unconscious boy. She commanded her squad members to bring a stretcher. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. She saw the burns on the boy's skin. They were deep, but she also saw something that made no sense. The wounds were already closing. The steam rising from his body was not just from the heat of the impact. It was from his cells working at a speed she had never seen before. Mayuri Kurotsuchi, the captain of the 12th squad, stepped in front of her. His face was painted in black and white, and his yellow eyes were wide with a twisted curiosity. He wanted the boy. He told Unohana that this was not a patient. He said the boy was a specimen. He claimed that the energy signature coming from the child was unlike anything in the history of the Soul Society. It was not spiritual pressure. It was raw biological life force compressed into a solid form. Mayuri reached out with a long, bony hand to grab the boy's shoulder. Before his fingers could touch the purple fabric of the boy's torn tunic, Captain Byakuya Kuchiki appeared between them. The flash step was silent. Byakuya held the handle of his sword. He did not look at Mayuri. He looked at the boy. He said that an intruder who could breach the Seireitei barrier without triggering a single sensor was a matter for internal security. He said the boy was a threat first and a subject for study second. The tension in the air was thick. 3 captains stood around a sleeping 11-year-old boy, while the dust settled around them. Head Captain Yamamoto slammed his cane into the ground. The sound cracked the stone pavement. Everyone went silent. The old man ordered Unohana to take the boy to the 4-squad barracks. He ordered Byakuya to place a guard perimeter around the building. He ordered Mayuri to analyze the residual energy in the pit. No one argued. They moved with discipline, but their minds were full of fear. They had felt the golden light. They knew this was not a normal day. Unohana rode in the back of the transport wagon with the boy. She placed her hands over his chest to use her healing kido. Green light glowed from her palms. Usually, her light would sink into a patient's body and stitch the spirit particles back together. But the light did not sink in. It hit the boy's skin and scattered. It was like trying to pour water onto a stone that was already soaked. His body was too dense. It was not made of spirit particles like a soul reaper or a normal human soul. It was solid matter, but harder. Unohana frowned. She pushed more spiritual energy into him. The boy's brow furrowed in his sleep. A low growl came from his throat. It sounded like a wild animal dreaming of a hunt. The wagon shook. The metal frame rattled. Unohana pulled her hands back. She realized that trying to force her energy into him was hurting him. His body was rejecting her magic as if it were a virus. She switched to standard medical supplies. She cleaned the blood from his face. She bandaged the deep cuts on his arm. She noticed that the arm was broken, but even as she wrapped it, she could feel the bone knitting itself back together. It was terrifying. A normal soul reaper would take weeks to heal such an injury. This boy was doing it in minutes while he slept. They arrived at the 4th Squad barracks. It was a place of white walls and quiet gardens. They placed the boy in the underground isolation ward. The walls were made of sekiseki stone, which blocked spiritual pressure. It was a cell designed for dangerous criminals who needed medical care. Unohana dismissed her subordinates. She sat alone by the bed. She watched the monitor that tracked his heartbeat. The rhythm was slow and heavy. Thump, thump, thump. Each beat sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. She waited. Hours passed. The sun went down outside, but in the underground room, the light remained artificial and cold. Gohan was dreaming. In his dream, everything was red. He saw the red ribbon on the android's chest. He saw the red blood on the ground. He saw the red flash of the beam that killed Trunks. The guilt was a heavy stone in his stomach. He heard Cell laughing. The laugh was everywhere. It echoed in the sky. Gohan looked at his hands in the dream. They were covered in blood. He looked up and saw his father, Goku. Goku was smiling and waving goodbye. Goku teleported away with the monster. Then there was a flash of light. Gohan screamed in his dream. He screamed for his dad to come back. He tried to run, but his legs were stuck in the mud. The mud turned into black fire. He felt the anger rising in his chest. It was the same anger that had snapped inside him when Cell crushed the android's head. The power surged. It wanted to get out. Gohan's eyes snapped open. He sat up in the bed. He did not gasp. He sucked in air with a violent hiss. The metal rails of the hospital bed twisted instantly as his hands gripped them. The solid steel bent like wet clay. The sudden movement sent a shockwave of air through the room. The glass of the monitoring machine shattered. Papers flew off the desk. Unohana did not flinch, but her hand went to her sword. Gohan looked around wildly. His eyes were teal-green, still glowing with the fading remnants of his transformation. He looked at the white walls. He looked at the woman in the captain's robe. He did not recognize her energy. He tried to sense for his friends. He reached out with his mind to find Krillin, or Piccolo, or Vegeta. He found nothing. The silence in his head was the worst part. Usually, the earth was loud with energy. He could always feel the warm hum of his friends. Now, there was nothing. There was only a cold, thin mist. The people nearby felt like ghosts. Their energy was slippery and faint. Gohan panicked. He thought Cell had won. He thought everyone was dead. He jumped out of the bed. The floor cracked under his bare feet. He wore only the white pants of the hospital patient. His chest was bandaged. He looked small and thin, but the air around him distorted. It rippled like heat rising from pavement. Unohana spoke softly. She asked him to calm down. She told him he was safe. She spoke in Japanese, which Gohan understood, but the accent was old and formal. Gohan looked at her. He asked where his father was. Unohana paused. She did not know who his father was. She told him that he fell from the sky alone. She told him he was in the Soul Society. Gohan confused the word for the afterlife. He stepped back until his back hit the stone wall. He thought he was dead. If he was in the spirit world, that meant he had died. That meant he had failed. Tears welled up in his eyes. He was the strongest warrior in the universe, but in that moment, he was just a confused child. The door to the isolation ward slid open. Lieutenant Izan Kotetsu stood there with a tray of food. She saw the broken bed. She saw the shattered glass. She saw the boy backed against the wall with tears in his eyes and energy rippling around him. She dropped the tray. The sound of the metal hitting the floor was loud. Gohan flinched. The ripple of energy around him expanded. It hit Izane like a physical punch. She flew backward into the hallway and crashed into the opposite wall. She slumped to the ground, unconscious. Unohana moved instantly. She drew her sword. It was not a threat, but a defense. She needed to protect her subordinate. Gohan saw the woman fall. His eyes went wide. He did not mean to hurt her. He pulled his energy in. He grabbed his own head. He apologized over and over. He shouted that he was sorry. He told them to stay away from him. He said he was dangerous. Unohana saw the fear in his posture. She sheathed her sword. She realized this was not an attack. It was a loss of control. She stepped over the broken glass. She raised her hands to show she was empty-handed. She told him that no one was angry. She told him to breathe. Gohan tried to listen. He closed his eyes. He focused on his breathing. The room stopped shaking. The heat dissipated. Up above, in the first squad barracks, the alarm was ringing again. The sensory unit had detected the spike of power from the underground ward. Captain Yamamoto stood up from his desk. He decided that the time for waiting was over. He called for Kenpachi Zaraki. If the boy was a monster, they needed a monster to test him. Down in the ward, Gohan sat on the floor. Unohana sat across from him. She asked him his name. He told her, Son Gohan. She asked him what he was. He hesitated. He had been taught to keep his heritage a secret. But his father was gone. The world was gone. He had nothing left to hide. He told her he was a Saiyan. She did not know the word. He explained that he came from Earth. She told him that this was the Soul Society, where souls go after death. But he was not dead. She touched his arm. She felt the pulse. She felt the warmth. He was alive. This confused Gohan even more. If he was alive, how did he get here? And where was Cell? The conversation was interrupted by a massive spiritual pressure crushing the building. It felt like a mountain falling on the roof. Gohan looked up. He felt a jagged, sharp energy approaching. It was wild and bloodthirsty. It felt evil, but not like Cell. It felt like a man who loved violence. The ceiling of the underground ward exploded. Debris rained down. A large man with bells in his hair and an eye patch landed in the center of the room. It was Kenpachi Zaraki. He grinned. His teeth were yellow and jagged. He looked at Gohan. He laughed. He said he heard that there was a strong kid. He wanted to see. Unohana stood up. Her face was cold. She told Kenpachi to leave. This was a hospital. Kenpachi ignored her. He drew his jagged sword. He pointed it at Gohan. He told the boy to pick up a weapon. Gohan shook his head. He did not want to fight. He was tired of fighting. He hated it. Kenpachi scowled. He did not like cowards. He swung his sword. It was a lazy swing, just to test the boy. But a lazy swing from Kenpachi could cut a building in half. The blade came down toward Gohan's shoulder. Gohan did not move. He did not dodge. He simply raised his left hand. He caught the blade. The sound was like a cannon firing. The ground beneath Gohan shattered into dust. A shockwave blew the door of the room off its hinges. But Gohan did not budge. He held the jagged blade between his thumb and forefinger. His skin was not cut. Kenpachi's smile disappeared. He looked at his sword. He looked at the boy's hand. He pushed harder. He flared his spiritual pressure until the golden aura looked like a skull. The pressure was enough to make a normal Soul Reaper's foam at the mouth. Gohan stood up slowly. He was still holding the sword. He looked Kenpachi in the eye. Gohan's eyes were not afraid. They were sad. Gohan told the man to stop. He said there was no point in this. He twisted his wrist. The steel of Kenpachi's sword snapped. The top half of the blade clattered to the floor. Kenpachi stared at his broken weapon. Silence filled the room. Unohana stared. She had never seen anyone break a zanpakuto with their bare hands, especially not Kenpachi's. This was impossible. The physics of the Soul Society said that spirit energy cut spirit energy. But Gohan had used physical force to break a spiritual weapon. Kenpachi started to laugh. It was a loud, manic laugh. He threw the handle away. He tore off his eye patch. The limiter was gone. His spiritual pressure exploded upward, tearing the roof off the rest of the building. He rushed at Gohan with his bare fists. He wanted a brawl. Gohan saw the madness in the man's eyes. He knew that if he fought back, he would kill this man. He did not want to kill anyone else. He had seen enough death. Gohan made a choice. He vanished. He moved faster than the flash step. He appeared behind Kenpachi. He did not strike. He simply chopped the man on the back of the neck. It was a controlled, precise blow. He used just enough energy to shut down the nervous system. Kenpachi's eyes rolled back. The giant man collapsed face first into the rubble. The golden aura vanished. The dust settled. Gohan stood over the defeated captain. He was breathing hard. The exertion of using his speed had caused his own wounds to open again. Blood dripped from his arm. He looked at Unohana. She was the only one left standing. He bowed to her. He apologized for breaking the roof. He apologized for hurting the man. He asked if there was a place where he could go where he wouldn't hurt anyone. He said he couldn't control his power right now. It was too much. The world felt too fragile. Unohana looked at the boy. She saw the monster that could defeat Kenpachi in 1 second, but she also saw the child who was terrified of his own strength. She nodded. She told him there was a place. She explained about the nest of maggots. It was a prison, but she called it a sanctuary. She said he would be alone there. Gohan nodded. He wanted to be alone. He wanted to make sure he never hurt anyone again. Captain Yamamoto arrived moments later with the rest of the guard. They saw Kenpachi unconscious in the rubble. They saw the broken sword. They saw the boy waiting quietly with his hands up. Yamamoto looked at Unohana. She gave him a small nod. The decision was made. They put chains on Gohan. The chains were made of spirit inhibitor stone. They were heavy. Gohan did not resist. He let them bind him. He walked with them out of the ruins of the hospital. He walked past the staring crowds of soul reapers. He kept his head down. He did not look at the sky. He was afraid that if he looked up, he would see Cell's face in the clouds. They took him to the second squad barracks. They took him down into the earth. The nest of maggots was dark and damp. It was filled with people who were considered dangerous to the Soul Society. They put Gohan in the deepest cell. It was a large cavern with a moat. There were no bars, just darkness. The jailers left him there. Gohan sat in the center of the stone floor. He pulled his knees to his chest. He closed his eyes. He tried to meditate. He tried to find the center of his mind, but the silence was still there. The emptiness where his father used to be. Days turned into weeks. Gohan stayed in the dark. He did not eat the food they threw down to him. He did not need to. His body was sustaining itself on the ambient reishi in the air, though he didn't know it. He was absorbing the spirit particles just by breathing. His body was adapting. The density of his muscles was increasing. The friction between his living body and the spirit world was disappearing. He was becoming a part of this reality. Outside the prison, the Soul Society was in chaos. The captains were arguing. Some wanted to execute the boy. They said he was too dangerous to live. Others, like Ukitake and Shunsui, argued that he was a child who had done nothing wrong. Mayuri was still demanding access to the boy for experiments. Yamamoto listened to them all, but he kept his own counsel. He had sent spies to the world of the living to see if there were any traces of the boy's origin. They found nothing. No record of a son Gohan. No record of a capsule corporation. It was as if he had fallen out of a different dimension, which of course he had. In the darkness of the cell, Gohan began to hear voices. Not voices in his head, but the voices of the other prisoners. They were whispering about him. They called him the Golden Demon. They said he had defeated a captain without drawing a sword. One prisoner, a man who had been there for 100 years, spoke to Gohan. He asked the boy why he was crying. Gohan didn't realize he was crying. He touched his face. His cheeks were wet. He told the voice that he missed his home. The prisoner laughed. He said that everyone in the nest of maggots missed something. That was why they were there. They were the ones who didn't fit. Gohan stood up. He practiced his forms. He moved slowly in the dark. Punch, kick, block. He went through the motions his father had taught him. He went through the motions Piccolo had taught him. It was the only way to keep his mind from breaking. As he moved, the air in the cavern began to swirl. The dampness evaporated. The stone floor dried out. The prisoners stopped whispering. They watched the boy in the dark. They could feel the pressure rising. It wasn't violent anymore. It was steady. It was calm. Gohan was rebuilding his control. He was learning how to hold the ocean of power inside a teacup. One day, a new visitor came to the edge of the moat. It was a small woman with black hair and glasses. She wore the uniform of a lieutenant. It was Nanao Isa from the 8th Squad. She carried a book. She told Gohan that Captain Shunsui Kyoraku had sent her. She asked if he wanted something to read. Gohan looked at her. He had not seen a book in weeks. His eyes lit up. He nodded. She threw the book across the moat. He caught it gently. It was a history of the Soul Society. Gohan sat down and began to read. He learned about the Soul King. He learned about the Hollows. He learned about the Quincy's. He devoured the information. His scholar's mind, dormant since the Cell games, woke up. He realized that this world had rules. It had a history. It had a logic. If he could understand the logic, maybe he could find a way home. Or if he couldn't go home, maybe he could find a reason to be here. He read until his eyes hurt in the dim light. He asked for more books. Nanao came back the next day with more. The weeks turned into months. Gohan became a legend in the prison. The boy who read in the dark. The boy who never got angry. The boy who could crush a rock into dust with his fingers, but handled the pages of a book like they were made of glass. The fear in the Soul Society began to fade, replaced by curiosity. But the peace was a fragile thing. Deep in the Dangai, the space between worlds, something was moving. The tear in reality that had brought Gohan to this world had not fully closed. It was leaking, and what was leaking through was not another lost child. It was the resonance of the energy that Gohan had left behind, the trace of the Cell games, the malice of the androids. It was attracting things. Hollows in the Hueco Mundo were mutating. They were feeding on the residual energy. A new breed of monster was growing in the shadows, and they were hungry for the source of the golden light. Gohan felt it first. He dropped his book. He stood up in his cell. He looked up at the ceiling, staring through the rock and the dirt, straight toward the sky he couldn't see. He felt a shiver run down his spine. It was a familiar feeling. It was the feeling of being hunted. He clenched his fists. The chains on his wrists groaned. He knew that his time in the dark was coming to an end. He knew that soon he would have to fight again. And this time, he wouldn't have his father to save him. He would have to be the one who saved everyone else. The isolation was ending. The real test was about to begin. The warning sirens in the Seireitei were usually a rhythmic, mournful wail that signaled an organized response to a spiritual threat. This time, the sirens did not sound. The first indication of the catastrophe was the color of the sky. The deep, serene blue of the Soul Society atmosphere began to bleed into a sickly, bruised violet. It started directly above the Rukongai, the sprawling districts of wandering souls that surrounded the walled city of the Seireitei. The clouds did not drift, they curdled. They twisted into shapes that defied the natural aerodynamics of the spirit world, forming spiraling funnels that pointed down like accusing fingers. In the Department of Research and Development, the screens monitoring the dimensional stability of the Dangai were screaming with data that made no sense. Akon, the third seat, stared at the readouts. The numbers were not fluctuating. They were rewriting themselves. The boundary between the Hueco Mundo and the Soul Society had not just thinned, it had been forcibly metabolized. Something was eating the walls of reality. Before he could shout for Captain Kurotsuchi, the first tear opened. It was not a garganta, the sliding mouth of darkness used by Arancars. It was a rupture. The sky tore open with the sound of wet fabric ripping, amplified 1,000 times. From the tear, they fell. They were not standard hollows. They did not have the white masks and the chaotic, hungry aura of lost souls. These creatures were sleek. They were covered in armor that gleamed with a biological sheen, colored in mottled greens and blacks. They had tails, They had needle-like protrusions on their backs. They did not scream, they hissed. The sound was low, vibrating at a frequency that caused the teeth of every Soul Reaper within 5 miles to ache. They dropped into the 78th district of the Rukongai, a place of poverty and high crime, and the slaughter began instantly. Squad 10 was on patrol in the area. Rangiku Matsumoto, the lieutenant, was the first to engage. She saw the creatures land and immediately released her zanpakuto, Hueco. The blade turned to ash, a cloud of razor-sharp cutting edges controlled by her will. She swung the hilt, directing the ash to shred the nearest creature. The ash hit the creature's green carapace and sparked. It did not cut. It bounced off like sand thrown against a tank. The creature turned its head. It had no eyes, only a smooth sensory dome. It moved with a speed that was not a flash step. It was pure physical acceleration. It closed the distance to Rangiku in a fraction of a second. She barely had time to raise a defensive barrier of Kido before a fist slammed into her stomach. The impact did not send her flying. It folded her. The air left her lungs and she collapsed, coughing up blood. The creature raised a hand, its fingers glowing not with a Seiro, but with a dense yellow ball of energy. Gohan felt the energy signature from his cell in the nest of maggots. It hit him like a physical blow. He dropped the history book he had been reading. The damp stone floor under his feet vibrated. He knew that energy. It wasn't exactly the same, but the flavor was unmistakable. It tasted like genetic engineering. It tasted like Cell. His breath hitched. The panic that he had been suppressing for months clawed at his throat. He thought he had left the nightmare behind. He thought he was in a different universe. But the nightmare had followed him. It had tracked the scent of his power across the dimensions. The ground shook violently as an explosion rocked the surface far above. Dust filtered down from the ceiling of the cavern. The other prisoners in the nest of maggots began to shout. They were blind in the dark, but they could feel the disturbance. The chaotic energy of the invasion was leaking down into the prison. The guards at the entrance of the cavern were yelling orders, their voices tight with fear. Then, the heavy doors of the prison blasted inward. It wasn't Gohan who broke them. It was the invasion. The creatures had sensed the massive reservoir of power deep underground. Gohan, and they were digging for it. Debris rained down into the moat. One of the green creatures landed on the stone bridge. It hissed, its tail swishing behind it. It looked at the prisoners. To the creature, they were just biomass. It raised a hand and fired a volley of yellow energy blasts. The explosions were deafening. Prisoners were vaporized instantly. The stone walls melted. Gohan stood up. The chains of spirit inhibitor stone on his wrists and ankles were heavy. They were designed to suppress reiatsu, the spiritual pressure of a soul reaper. But Gohan did not use reiatsu. He used kai. He used the latent energy of his physical body. For months, he had been docile, terrified of hurting anyone. He had let the chains hold him because he wanted to be held. He wanted to be restrained. But now, people were dying. He could hear the screams of the prisoners. He could feel the fading life force of the guards. He looked at the creature on the bridge. It was preparing to fire again, aiming at a group of cowering prisoners in the corner. Gohan did not think. He reacted. He clenched his fists. The muscles in his arms expanded. The stone cuffs on his wrist did not crack, they shattered. The fragments of the legendary inhibitor stone exploded outward like shrapnel. Gohan vanished. He reappeared in front of the creature. He did not use a flash step. He moved with pure kinetic velocity. The air boom that followed his movement threw the nearby prisoners off their feet. Gohan caught the creature's wrist, just as the yellow light flared. The creature hissed and tried to pull away. It was strong. It possessed a physical strength that would rival a seated officer. But against Gohan, it was nothing. Gohan looked at the creature with cold, teal eyes. He saw the resemblance to the Cell Juniors. The trauma overlaid the reality. For a second, he wasn't in a cave in the Soul Society. He was in the wasteland on Earth. Gohan squeezed. The creature's exoskeleton crunched. Green blood sprayed. Gohan twisted his hips and threw the monster. He hurled it not at the wall but upward, back through the hole it had made in the ceiling. The creature flew like a missile, crashing through layers of rock and soil until it exploded into the daylight above. Gohan looked at his hands. They were shaking, not from exertion but from rage. The seal was broken. He bent his knees. The stone floor beneath him disintegrated into sand. He launched himself upward. He flew through the tunnel, shattering the rock as he went, a human bullet piercing the earth. He burst out of the ground into the courtyard of the second squad barracks. The scene was a massacre. The stealth force, the elite assassins of the Soul Society, were being decimated. They were fast, but their weapons were useless. Their Shikai blades chipped against the bio-armor of the invaders. Captain Soi Fon was in the center of the chaos. She was moving like a blur, striking the pressure points of a massive beetle-like intruder. She hit the same spot twice with her stinger, Suzumebachi. The symbol of death appeared, glowing black, but the creature did not die. Its biology was too redundant, its life force too alien. The instant death technique failed. The creature swiped a clawed hand, catching Soi Fon in the ribs. She went tumbling across the courtyard, crashing through a wooden veranda. There were 6 of the creatures in the courtyard. They turned as one toward the new energy source. Gohan hovered in the air above the hole he had made. His purple gi was tattered, his hair long and wild from months of neglect. He looked small against the backdrop of the burning barracks, but the air around him was heavy. It was so heavy that the fires in the courtyard flattened. The flames pressed down against the wood. Gohan saw Soi Fon trying to stand up. She was clutching her side, blood leaking between her fingers. He saw the bodies of the lower-ranking Shinigami scattered like broken dolls. He saw the green monsters advancing. No more. The thought was absolute. Gohan raised his hand. He did not charge a Kamehameha. He did not use a named technique. He simply pushed his energy out. A wave of golden light erupted from his palm. It wasn't a beam. It was a wall. It hit the 3 nearest creatures. There was no resistance. They did not break apart. They ceased to exist. The energy wave vaporized them on the molecular level, scrubbing their atoms from the air. The blast continued, carving a trench through the barracks walls, through the forest beyond, and disappearing into the horizon. Silence fell over the courtyard. The remaining 3 creatures paused. Their biological programming screamed that this prey was different. This prey was a predator. Soi Fon stared up at the boy. She had heard the rumors of the monster in the maggot's nest. She had dismissed them as exaggeration. She watched the steam rising from the trench where her enemies had stood a second ago. The heat wash dried the blood on her face. She realized that if he wanted to, this child could destroy the Seireitei faster than any army. Gohan landed. He walked toward the remaining creatures. He did not run. He walked with a grim determination that belonged to a soldier, not a child. The creatures hissed and lunged. Gohan sidestepped the first one. He drove his elbow into his chest. The impact sounded like a thunderclap. The creature's back blew out. He spun and kicked the second one. The kick took its head off. The third one tried to fly away. Gohan extended a finger. A small, condensed shot of energy pierced the creature's core. It fell dead. It was over in seconds. The immediate threat to the second squad was gone. But the invasion was not over. The sky was still purple. More tears were opening across the Seireitei. Gohan could feel them. He could feel hundreds of these things swarming the city. He could feel the panic of the captains. He could feel the dying. He turned to Suifon. She had pulled herself to her feet, leaning against a broken pillar. She held her zanpakuto up, unsure if he was an ally or the next threat. Gohan bowed to her. It was a polite, formal bow, absurdly incongruous with the violence he had just displayed. He apologized for breaking the prison. He asked her where the strongest energy was. He asked where the leader of the Soul Society was. Suifon hesitated. Her instincts told her to attack him for escaping. Her logic told her that would be suicide. She pointed toward the center of the city, toward the first squad barracks. She told him that Captain Commander Yamamoto was there. Gohan nodded. He crouched and took off, the sonic boom of his departure shattering the remaining windows in the courtyard. High above the Seireitei, Gohan flew. The wind whipped his face. He looked down and saw the city burning. Smoke plumes rose from every district. He saw Captain Komamura's giant bankai, fighting a swarm of the creatures near the southern gate. He saw hits of ice from Captain Hitsugaya in the west. The Gotei 13 was fighting for its life. But Gohan was looking for something specific. He was sensing for the source. These creatures were not random. They were being directed. He felt a cold, sharp intelligence behind the swarm. It wasn't coming from the tears in the sky. It was coming from the ground. It was coming from a location near the central execution grounds. He changed course. He dove toward the Sokyoku Hill. On the hill, a group of the elite creatures had surrounded a squad of Kido Corps members. These creatures were larger, evolving in real time. They were absorbing the reishi from the atmosphere and growing stronger armor. The Kido spells fired at them were being eaten. The creatures were feeding on the magic. Gohan slammed into the ground between the Kido Corps and the monsters. The impact cratered the rock. The Kido Corps members flinched, terrified by the sudden arrival of the golden aura. Gohan did not look at them. He looked at the monsters. "Leave," Gohan said. His voice was quiet, but it carried over the roar of the fires. "Leave this planet. Leave this world." The creatures did not understand language. They only understood power. They rushed him. Gohan flared his aura. The golden light intensified, turning white at the edges. He moved. This time, he didn't just strike. He tore. He grabbed the leading creature by its horn and slammed it into the ground, dragging it through the bedrock. He threw it into its packmates. He cupped his hands. Me. The blue light illuminated the entire hill. The captains fighting in the city below looked up. They felt the pressure. It was different from reiatsu. It was heavier, denser. It felt like a star was being born on Sokyoku Hill. Me. The creatures sensed the danger. They tried to scatter. The beam was enormous. It was a river of blue destruction that engulfed the creatures and shot into the sky, punching a hole through the purple clouds. The beam continued upward, hitting the dimensional tear that was spewing the monsters. The energy flooded the tear, overloading the stability of the gateway. The tear collapsed in a flash of blinding white light. The connection to the source was severed. Gohan stood panting as the beam faded. The sky began to clear, the purple stain receding. The immediate invasion force was cut off. The remaining creatures in the city, severed from their hive mind, went feral and confused, making them easier targets for the captains to finish off. But the catastrophe was not the invasion. The catastrophe was the revelation. Gohan turned around. Standing at the edge of the cliff, watching him, was a man in a white haori. It was Sosuke Aizen. The captain of the 5th squad wore his glasses and his gentle smile. He was clapping slowly. Gohan looked at Aizen. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. He sensed something under the man's skin. It wasn't the wild malice of Cell. It was something worse. It was a void. A perfect, controlled emptiness. Magnificent, Aizen said softly. Truly magnificent. I theorized that a being of pure physical energy existed. But to see it, to see how it ignores the laws of spirit particles, it is a revelation. Gohan narrowed his eyes. Who are you? I am a friend, Aizen lied. His reiatsu was perfectly calm. You saved us, Gohan-kun. You did what the Gotei 13 could not. Gohan stepped back. He didn't trust this man. His instincts, sharpened by the survival games of his childhood, were screaming. This man felt like a snake. Suddenly, Head Captain Yamamoto landed on the hill. He was surrounded by flames. He looked at the dead monsters. He looked at the hole in the sky. He looked at Gohan. The old man was furious, not at the monsters, but at the chaos, at the fact that a prisoner had broken loose and displayed power that shamed his captains. Boy, Yamamoto's voice was like grinding stones. You have broken your confinement. Gohan bowed his head. I had to. They were dying. That is not for you to decide. Yamamoto raised his cane. The wood burned away, revealing the blade of Rujinjaka. You are a threat to the stability of this world. Your power invites disaster. Captain Commander, Aizen interjected smoothly. Perhaps we should be grateful. Without him, the damage would have been far greater. He closed the breach. Yamamoto glared at Aizen, then back at Gohan. The old man knew Aizen was right, which made him hate the situation even more. The Soul Society prided itself on order, on hierarchy. Gohan was an anomaly that broke every rule. He was a living weapon that answered to no captain. Gohan looked at the old man. He saw the fear behind the anger. He realized something profound. These people, these gods of death, were afraid of him. He was the strongest thing in their world, and he was just a child. I won't go back in the hole, Gohan said. He didn't shout. He just stated it as a fact. I won't sit in the dark while people get hurt. If you want to fight me, you can. But I won't let you put chains on me again. Yamamoto's eyes widened. It was an ultimatum. The air grew thick. The flames around Yamamoto roared higher. Gohan shifted his stance, dropping into the turtle school fighting pose. The ground cracked under his feet. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, a message arrived via Hell Butterfly. It fluttered to Yamamoto's ear. The message was from the Central 46. They had monitored the battle. They had seen the power. They issued an emergency order. Yamamoto lowered his sword. The flames died down. He looked at Gohan with a mixture of disgust and resignation. You are to be placed under the direct supervision of the 13th Squad, Yamamoto growled. Captain Ukitake will be your warden. You will not return to the nest of maggots. But make no mistake, boy. One wrong step, one loss of control, and I will burn you out of existence myself. Gohan relaxed his stance. He nodded. I understand. Aizen smiled behind his hand. He watched the interaction with deep interest. The board had changed. A new piece had been added. A piece that could destroy the king, or perhaps become the key to the royal palace. Aizen adjusted his glasses. The invasion of the biohollows was a failure in terms of conquest, but it had been a masterful success in forcing the boy's hand. He had wanted to see what Gohan could do. Now he knew. And now the real experiments could begin. Gohan standing on the hill, the smoke of the burning city rising around him. He was free from the prison, but he was trapped in a much more dangerous game. He had revealed his hand. The Soul Society knew what he was now, and somewhere in the shadows, the true enemies were already rewriting their plans to account for the Saiyan. The timeline had shifted irrevocably. The Golden Demon was loose. Rain fell over the Ugendo quarters of the 13th Squad. It was a gentle, persistent rain that smelled of ozone and old stone. Gohan sat on the wooden veranda, watching the water drip from the eaves. He had been in the care of Captain Yushiro Ukitake for 3 weeks. The transition from the darkness of the maggot's nest to the serenity of the noble barracks was jarring. Here, everything was soft. The futons were soft. The voices were soft. Even the food was soft, mostly rice porridge and stewed vegetables meant for the captain's delicate constitution. Gohan ate it all. He ate the servants' portions too. He ate until the pots were scraped clean, but the gnawing emptiness in his stomach did not go away. It wasn't just hunger. It was a fundamental lack of fuel. Captain Ukitake sat across from him, sipping tea. The white-haired man looked frail, his skin pale against the grey sky, but his eyes were sharp and kind. He had been observing the boy. He noticed how Gohan moved with a constant, subconscious restraint, as if he were afraid the floorboards would snap under his weight. He noticed how Gohan's gaze would drift to the sky, searching for a sun that felt too distant and cold. Ukitake placed his cup down. He spoke about the nature of the soul. He explained that in the Soul Society, hunger was usually a sign of high spiritual pressure. A soul that needed to eat was a soul that possessed power. Gohan listened politely. He didn't have the heart to tell the captain that his hunger was not spiritual. It was biological. His Saiyan cells, forged in high gravity and fueled by the dense organic matter of Earth, were starving. The spirit particles of this world, the reishi that made up the water, the wood, and the air, were too thin. He was an engine designed for high-octane fuel running on fumes. Kiyone Kotetsu and Sentaro Kotsubaki, the 2 third seats of the squad, rushed into the garden. They were arguing, as usual, about who would bring the captain his medicine. They stopped when they saw Gohan. The argument died in their throats. They were terrified of him. Everyone was. The rumors of the Golden Demon had spread through the Seireitei like a virus. They said he had eyes that could burn a man to ash. They said he ate hollows. Gohan looked at them and offered a small, tentative smile. It was the smile of a child who wants to be liked but expects to be rejected. Sentaro flinched. Kiyone bowed stiffly and hurried away. Gohan's smile faded. He looked back at the rain. He felt the isolation wrapping around him again, tighter than the chains in the prison. Later that afternoon, a visitor arrived. It was Rukia Kuchiki. She was not a seated officer, just a regular squad member, but her adoption into the noble Kuchiki family gave her a strange, liminal status. She walked into the room with a formal stiffness that reminded Gohan of the way Piccolo would stand when he was uncomfortable. She carried a basket of persimmons. She told Captain Ukitake that her brother, Captain Byakuya, had received them as a gift and wished to share them. It was a lie. Byakuya would never send a gift to Ukitake so casually. Rukia had brought them herself. She looked at Gohan. Her violet eyes were wide, assessing him. She didn't look scared. She looked curious. Ukitake introduced them. He told Gohan that Rukia was a talented Shinigami. Gohan bowed. Rukia bowed back. She sat down and began to peel a persimmon. She handed a slice to Gohan. He took it. The fruit was sweet, but it dissolved in his mouth like mist. He thanked her. Rukia asked him about the fight on the hill. She asked him about the beam of light. She didn't ask with the clinical detachment of a researcher like Mayuri. She asked with the intensity of a warrior who wanted to understand strength. Gohan told her he didn't want to talk about fighting. He said he didn't like it. Rukia paused, the knife hovering over the fruit. She looked at his hands, which were resting on his knees. They were scarred. She recognized the look in his eyes. It was the look of someone who had survived something they shouldn't have. It was the same look she saw in the mirror when she thought about Kai and Shiba. The peace of the afternoon was shattered by a hell butterfly. The black insect fluttered into the room and landed on Ukitaki's finger. The captain's face hardened. He listened to the message. A distortion had been detected in District 46 of the Rukongai. It wasn't an invasion like before. It was a singularity. A single point of gravity that was crushing the souls nearby. Ukitaki stood up. He grabbed his dual swords. He began to cough, a violent hacking sound that shook his thin frame. Blood splattered onto his white robe. Rukia rushed to his side. She told him he couldn't go. She said the lieutenant was away on a mission. She said she would lead the advance team. Ukitaki shook his head. He said the reading was too high for a normal squad. Gohan stood up. The wooden floorboards finally cracked. He didn't mean to do it. His body was reacting to the threat before his mind did. He felt the energy in District 46. It was familiar. It wasn't Cell, and it wasn't the biohollows. It was something that felt like a void. It felt like the space between stars. He told Ukitake he would go. Ukitake forbade it. He cited the orders of Central 46. Gohan was under house arrest. If he left the barracks, he would be considered a rogue agent. Gohan looked at the captain. He saw the blood on the man's chin. He saw Rukia's worry. He clenched his fists. He said he didn't care about the rules. He cared about the people who were dying right now. Before Ukitaki could stop him, Gohan walked to the edge of the veranda. He didn't fly. He simply stepped into the air and vanished, moving so fast that the raindrops didn't have time to fill the space where he had been. Gohan arrived in District 46 in 3 seconds. The scene was a nightmare. The forest was gone. In its place was a crater of twisted gravity. Trees were being pulled into the center and crushed into splinters. At the heart of the anomaly was a hollow. But it looked wrong. It was white, humanoid, and missing a face. In place of a mask, it had a smooth, white surface with a hole in the center of its chest that glowed with a sickly purple light. It wasn't screaming. It was singing. A low, discordant melody that made Gohan's ears ring. This was an experiment. A prototype created by Sosuke Aizen in his hidden laboratory, designed to test the limits of soul consumption. It was a vortex that ate reishi. Villagers were trapped in the gravity well. Their souls were being stretched, pulled like taffy toward the monster's chest. Gohan landed on the edge of the crater. The gravity hit him. It was heavy, perhaps 50 times Earth's gravity. To Gohan, who had trained in the hyperbolic time chamber, it was manageable. He walked down the slope. The hollow stopped singing. It turned its faceless head toward him. It sensed the dense, rich life force of the Saiyan. It was the meal it had been built to find. The hollow moved. It didn't use steps. It used attraction. It pulled itself toward Gohan, closing the distance instantly. A clawed hand swiped at Gohan's throat. Gohan caught the wrist. The impact caused the ground to ripple. Gohan felt a shock. The hollow wasn't just hitting him, it was draining him. Upon contact, he felt his kai slipping away, sucked into the purple hole in the creature's chest. Gohan kicked the beast away. It tumbled back, but it righted itself in midair and laughed. It grew larger. It had eaten his energy and used it to evolve. Spikes erupted from its shoulders. Gohan realized the trap. This thing was a sponge. If he used energy blasts, it would just get stronger. He had to use physical force. He had to crush it. He flared his aura, the gold light ripping through the grey afternoon. He charged. He delivered a flurry of punches, each one breaking the sound barrier. The hollow's armor cracked. Black ichor sprayed. But for every hit Gohan landed, he lost a fraction of his stamina. The creature was leeching his vitality through the kinetic impact. Gohan's breath became ragged. His vision blurred. He was running out of fuel. Back in the Seireitei, in the Department of Research and Development, Mayuri Kurotsuchi watched the data stream. He licked his lips. The graph showing Gohan's biological energy was plummeting. The boy was hitting his limit. Mai and Mayuri had predicted this. The Saiyan biology required massive caloric intake to sustain its combat output. In the Soul Society, without food, Gohan was burning his own life force. He was cannibalizing his organs to keep fighting. It was a fascinating accelerated decay. On the battlefield, Gohan fell to one knee. The hollow loomed over him. It was now twice its original size, bloated with Gohan's stolen power. It raised a massive fist to finish him. Gohan looked up. He felt the darkness closing in. He thought of his father. He thought of the promise he made to protect people. He couldn't die here. Not like this. His body screamed. It needed energy. Any energy. The survival instinct of the Saiyan race is a terrifying thing. It adapts. When pushed to the brink of death, the cells do not just repair, they evolve. Gohan's body, starving and empty, did something it had never done before. It stopped pushing energy out and started pulling it in. The change was violent. A vortex of wind swirled around Gohan. The grass, the trees, the rocks, everything began to wither. The reishi in the air, the spirit particles that defined the world, were ripped from their bonds and sucked the boy. The golden aura around him changed. It flickered, turning a pale, translucent white at the edges. Gohan screamed. It felt like drinking fire. The spirit particles flooded his system, clashing with his biological cells, forcing a synthesis. His body was learning to metabolize the soul world. The hollow paused. It felt the flow reverse. It was no longer the eater. It was the eaten. Gohan stood up. His eyes were no longer teal. They were a piercing, luminous silver for a brief second before returning to gold. He didn't punch the hollow. He grabbed it by the face. The purple light in the creature's chest flickered and died. Gohan drained it. He ripped the stolen energy back, along with the creature's own spirit pressure. The hollow crumbled into dust. Its structure collapsed by the sudden vacuum. Gohan stood alone in the crater. The forest around him was dead, turned to grey ash. He breathed in deeply. The air rattled in his chest. He felt full, but it was a cold, alien fullness. He had survived, but he had crossed a line. He had consumed a soul. Squad 13 arrived moments later. Rukia led the team. They stopped at the rim of the crater. They saw the devastation. They saw the withered earth. They saw Gohan standing in the center, his clothes torn, his skin glowing with a faint, eerie light. Rukia stepped forward. She called his name. Gohan turned. His expression was blank. For a moment, he didn't recognize her. Then the gold faded from his hair. He collapsed face forward into the dirt. They carried him back to the barracks. This time they didn't take him to the medical ward. They took him to a secured room in the Ujendo. Ukitake sat by his bedside all night. He watched the boy's chest rise and fall. He felt the change in the boy's reiatsu. It wasn't just physical life force anymore. It was mixed with reishi. Gohan was becoming a hybrid. Ukitake knew what the Central 46 would say. They would say he was a Quincy. They would say he was an abomination. Gohan woke up 2 days later. He felt different. He felt heavier. The hunger was gone, replaced by a dull thrumming in his veins. He sat up. Ukitake was there. The captain looked grave. He told Gohan what had happened. He told him that the area around the fight had been sterilized. Nothing would grow there for 100 years. Gohan looked at his hands. He felt a wave of nausea. He was a destroyer. Everywhere he went, he destroyed. I didn't mean to, Gohan whispered. I know, Ukitake said softly, but intention does not change the outcome. You are changing, Gohan. Your body is adapting to this world, but in doing so, you are becoming something this world has never seen. The door slid open. Captain Suifon stood there. She was not alone. Behind her were 4 members of the Onmitsukido, their faces covered. She held a warrant. By order of the Central 46, Suifon announced, her voice cold. The entity known as Son Gohan is to be taken into custody for immediate judgment. He is classified as a Class A spirit hazard. Ukitake stood up. He grabbed his swords. He is under my supervision, Captain Suifon. Not anymore, Suifon replied. He consumed a soul, Ukitake. He is not a Shinigami. He is a hollow in human skin. Step aside. Gohan swung his legs off the bed. He stood between the 2 captains. He looked at Suifon. He didn't flare his aura. He didn't fight. He just looked at her with tired, ancient eyes. I'll go, Gohan said. Gohan, no, Ukitake protested. I'll go, Gohan repeated. I don't want you to fight for me, Captain. I'm tired of people getting hurt because of me. He walked towards Suifon. He extended his hands. She placed the shackles on him. They were different this time. They were etched with glowing runes of suppression. Gohan let them take him. He walked out of the barracks into the sunlight. He saw Rukia watching from the garden. She looked devastated. He didn't wave. He kept his head down. As they led him away, high atop a tower in the Seireitei, Sosuke Aizen watched. He smiled. The experiment was a resounding success. Gohan had proven that a physical body could metabolize spirit particles. The barrier between the races was permeable. The boy was the key. Now Aizen just needed to break him completely so he could be rebuilt. The chaos was spreading. The chain reaction had begun. The Soul Society was afraid of the boy, which meant they would make mistakes. And Aizen would be there to capitalize on every single one. Gohan being led into the Central 46 compound. The massive doors slammed shut behind him, sealing him in the dark once again. But this time, he wasn't alone in the dark. The power he had absorbed from the hollow was still there, sitting in his gut like a cold stone. It whispered to him. It told him that he didn't need to be afraid. It told him that he could eat the darkness too. Gohan closed his eyes and tried to remember his father's voice, but it was getting harder to hear over the sound of his own evolving heartbeat. The hero was dying. The survivor was taking his place. The darkness of the underground assembly hall was absolute. It was a darkness designed to strip away hope, a void where only the voices of the judges existed. Gohan knelt in the center of the pit. He was not chained this time. They knew chains were useless. He stayed on his knees because he had no will to stand. The 46 members of the Central 46 were hidden behind high screens, their spiritual pressure cold and indistinct. The judgment had been swift. There was no defense attorney. There were no witnesses called to speak on his behalf. The charge was existence. The verdict was erasure. The voice of the presiding judge echoed from the shadows. He declared that the entity known as Son Gohan was a biological anomaly, incompatible with the cycle of reincarnation. He stated that Gohan's ability to consume souls demonstrated in District 46 posed an existential threat to the balance of the worlds. If allowed to live, the boy would eventually metabolize the entire Soul Society. Therefore, the execution method would be the Sokyoku. the ultimate punishment usually reserved for captains who committed treason. The magnitude of the weapon was the only thing guaranteed to vaporize the boy's dense cellular structure. Gohan listened to the sentence. He did not look up. He did not cry. He felt a strange sense of relief. For months, he had been terrified of his own power. He had broken the world he came from, failing to save his father. Now, he was breaking this world too. He remembered the feeling of the hollow's energy sliding down his throat, the cold satisfaction of the kill. It made him sick. He believed them. He believed he was a monster. When the judge asked if he had any final words, Gohan simply shook his head. He accepted the death. He wanted it. He wanted the noise in his head to stop. Outside the assembly hall, the news of the execution spread like a shockwave. It was unprecedented. An execution of a child, a non-shinigami by the Sokyoku, scheduled for 3 days from now. The speed of the order smelled of conspiracy, but the authority of the Central 46 was absolute. In the first squad barracks, Captain Shunsui Kyoraku poured a cup of sake for his friend Jushiro Ukitake. Neither man drank. The rain from days ago had stopped, replaced by a stifling, humid heat. Ukitake was pale. He blamed himself. He had been the one to harbor the boy. He had been the one to let him go to District 46. Kyoraku adjusted his straw hat. His eyes shadowed. He said that the rush to execution was not about justice. It was about fear, or perhaps it was about removing a piece from the board before anyone could understand its value. In the Squad 6 barracks, Captain Byakuya Kuchiki stood in his courtyard, staring at the cherry blossom trees. Renji Abarai, his lieutenant, stood behind him, shifting uncomfortably. Renji wanted to speak. He wanted to say that this was wrong, that the kid had saved the Seireitei from the invasion only weeks ago. But he saw the set of Byakuya's shoulders. The noble captain was torn between the law and the truth. Byakuya had seen the boy's eyes. He had seen the lack of malice, but he had also felt the pressure on the hill. The boy was a dragon sleeping in a paper house. Byakuya remained silent. His silence was a choice, a small inaction that hardened the path to tragedy. Deep in the confinement cells of the Shrine of Penitence, Gohan sat on the floor. The white tower was visible through the single high window. The Sokyoku. It looked like a giant crucifix against the moon. Gohan closed his eyes and tried to meditate, but his mind was a storm. He wondered if his father was watching him from the other world. He wondered if Goku was disappointed. "You were supposed to protect them, Gohan," the voice in his head said. "But you just eat them." The door to his cell opened. It was not a guard. It was Captain Sosuke Aizen. The man walked in with a calm, paternal grace. He dismissed the guards with a wave of his hand. He stood over Gohan, his white hari glowing in the dim light. Gohan looked up. He felt a twitch in his gut. His instincts, the ones that had saved him against Frieza, warned him. But his grief was too loud. He didn't trust Aizen, but he was desperate for connection. Aizen knelt, so he was eye level with the boy. He spoke softly. He told Gohan that he had tried to plead his case to the Central 46. He lied. He said that he believed Gohan was a gift, a bridge between the living and the dead. He said that the Soul Society was old and afraid of change. He reached out and placed a hand on Gohan's shoulder. The touch was cold. Aizen whispered that there was honor in sacrifice. He told Gohan that by accepting this death, he was protecting the people that he had come to care about. He mentioned Rukia. He mentioned Ukitake. He said that if Gohan fought back, if he tried to escape, the Gotei 13 would be forced to kill him, and many good soul reapers would die in the process. This was the pivot point, the small choice. Gohan could have seen through the manipulation. He could have sensed the malice hidden beneath the polite words. He was smart, but he was 11 years old, traumatized, and hated himself more than anyone else ever could. Gohan looked at Aizen and nodded. He made the choice to be passive. He made the choice to be a martyr. "I won't fight," Gohan whispered. "I'll let them do it." Aizen smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You are a good boy, Gohan," Aizen said. "A true hero." As Aizen left the cell, his smile widened. The plan was perfect. He didn't need Gohan dead. He needed Gohan broken open. The Sokyoku was the tool. The flaming bird had the power of 1,000,000 zanpakuto. If it struck a normal soul, it vaporized them. But Gohan was not a normal soul. He was a sponge. Aizen had seen it in District 46. When pushed to the brink of destruction, Gohan's biology inverted and absorbed the energy attacking it. Aizen was betting everything on that mechanic. He wanted to see what happened when an infinite energy source struck an infinite energy vessel. He wasn't trying to execute a criminal. He was trying to ignite a sun. The morning of the execution arrived. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue. The air was dry. The entire Gotei 13 had gathered on the Tsukyoku Hill. The lieutenants and captains stood in formation. The mood was somber. There was no cheering. This felt like a funeral for the Soul Society's honor, not a triumph of justice. Gohan was led out. He wore white ceremonial robes that looked too big for him. His arms were bound to the cross. He didn't struggle. He looked at the crowd. He saw Rukia standing with Renji. She was crying. He saw Ukitake looking away, his hand gripping his sword hilt so hard his knuckles were white. He saw Kenpachi yawning, bored because there was no fight. Gohan looked up at the sky. "I'm sorry, Dad," he thought. "I'm coming to see you soon." Captain Commander Yamamoto stepped forward. He read the final writ of execution. He commanded the release of the Sokyoku. The massive halberd transformed. The wood and steel burned away, revealing the true form of the weapon. It was a phoenix of pure fire, a creature of such intense spiritual pressure that the weaker lieutenants had to kneel to keep from passing out. The bird screeched. It was the sound of judgment. At that moment, a flash step disturbed the wind. Captain Shunsui Kyoraku and Captain Jushiro Ukitake moved. They appeared on either side of the scaffold. They held a strange device, a shield bearing the crest of the Shihoin clan. They were going to stop it. They were going to defy the Central 46. "I can't let a child die like this," Ukitake shouted, coughing as he raised his spiritual pressure. Kyoraku tipped his hat. "Sorry, old man, but this leaves a bad taste in my mouth." Yamamoto's eyes narrowed. He prepared to engage his students. The execution ground was about to turn into a battlefield. But Gohan spoke. His voice was amplified by the acoustics of the hill. "Don't," Gohan said. Ukitake froze. He looked up at the boy on the cross. "Gohan, don't fight for me," Gohan said. His voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. "Please, I want this. If you fight, you'll just get hurt. I don't want anyone else to get hurt." The hesitation cost them. In that split second of confusion, the mechanism of the Sokyoku fully engaged. The phoenix shrieked and dove. It ignored the captains. It targeted the boy. The heat was absolute. The rock of the hill turned to glass. Gohan closed his eyes. He did what he had decided to do in the cell. He dropped his barriers. He suppressed his kai. He emptied his vessel. He made himself a vacuum. He invited the fire in. The phoenix struck. There was no explosion. Not at first. There was a sound like a massive intake of breath. The giant bird of fire slammed into Gohan's chest and vanished. The light didn't expand. it contracted. The world turned grey as the colour was sucked out of the atmosphere. The silence that followed was louder than any thunder. Gohan hung on the cross. He was not dead. He was glowing. His skin had turned a translucent white. His hair was floating, shifting from black to gold to a deep cosmic crimson. The Sokyoku, the power of 1,000,000 swords, was inside him, and it was looking for a way out. Gohan's eyes opened. There were no pupils, just white light. The small choice to suppress his power had created the massive outcome. Instead of resisting the execution, which would have resulted in a deflection or an explosion, he had absorbed it. He had metabolized the executioner. The feedback loop began. Gohan's Saiyan cells, flooded with infinite energy, began to divide and mutate instantly. The cross behind him shattered. He floated into the air. The inhibitor runes on his shackles disintegrated. The spiritual pressure that rolled off him was not just heavy. It was solid. It crushed the glass floor of the hill. Yamamoto looked up, his face pale for the first time in centuries. "What have you done?" he whispered. Aizen stepped forward from the line of captains. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was staring with the intensity of a scientist witnessing the birth of a new universe. "Evolution," Aizen said. Gohan screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was the sound of a container breaking. The energy erupted. A pillar of crimson light shot into the sky. It didn't stop at the clouds. It punched through the atmosphere of the Soul Society. It punched through the barrier of the Dangai. It pierced the fabric of the dimensions. The shockwave flattened the first squad barracks instantly. Captains were thrown like leaves in a hurricane. Byakuya used his bankai to create a wall of blades to protect Rukia and Renji, but the wall shattered. Kenpachi was laughing maniacally as he was blown backward, his skin flayed by the energy wind. The light expanded. It wasn't just destroying the Seireitei, it was rewriting it. The spirit particles in the air were being forcefully converted into physical matter. Stone became flesh. Air became blood. The reality of the Soul Society was being overwritten by the sheer density of Gohan's existence. He was a singularity of life in a world of death. In the center of the pillar, Gohan was no longer an 11-year-old boy. He was a silhouette of pure power. He didn't know who he was. He didn't remember his father. He didn't remember Aizen. All he knew was the burning. The fire of the phoenix was eating his mind, and his Saiyan blood was eating the fire. The sky above the Seireitei cracked. It looked like a mirror shattering. Through the cracks, a different sky was visible. A sky with a green tint. A sky with 2 moons. The Hueco Mundo. Gohan's power had torn down the wall between the worlds. From the cracks, thousands of hollows began to pour through, drawn like moth to the ultimate flame. But they didn't attack. They hovered, circling the pillar of light, bowing to the new king. Aizen adjusted his glasses. The wind was tearing at his clothes, but he stood his ground. This was more than he had calculated. He had expected a breakdown. He had expected a weapon he could point. Instead, he had created a natural disaster. The Hogyoku in his pocket was vibrating, resonating with the boy. It wanted to go to him. "Captain Aizen," Tosun yelled over the roar of the wind. "We must retreat. The Seireitei is collapsing." "Not yet," Aizen said. "Watch, the chrysalis is breaking." Gohan lowered his hands. The pillar of light vanished, sucked back into his body. He hovered in the air above the ruins of the execution grounds. He looked different. He was taller. His ji was gone, replaced by a shell of white energy that looked like armor. His hair was long, flowing down his back like a river of gold. He looked down at the Gotei 13. He raised one finger. A sphere of red energy appeared at the tip. It was small, the size of a marble, but everyone felt it. It was the condensed essence of the Sokyoku. Run, Yamamoto ordered. It was the first time the head captain had ever given that order. Gohan flicked his finger. The marble dropped. It hit the center of the Seireitei. The destruction was silent. A sphere of white void expanded, eating the Central 46 compound, the first squad barracks, and the hill itself. It carved a perfect hemisphere out of the city. When the light faded, a third of the Seireitei was gone. Just gone. Gohan floated in the center of the void. He looked at his hand. He blinked. The white light in his eyes faded, returning to teal. He looked around. He saw the devastation. He saw the captains wounded and scattered. He saw the fear in Rukia's eyes as she peered over the edge of a broken cliff. The memory returned. He had done it again. He had tried to be passive, and he had destroyed everything. Aizen stepped out onto the air, walking on invisible steps. He approached Gohan. He clapped his hands. "Beautiful," Aizen said. "You have surpassed all logic, Gohan-kun." Gohan looked at Aizen. The fog in his brain cleared. He saw the Hogyoku glowing in Aizen's robes. He felt the connection, and for the first time he understood. He saw the strings. He saw the manipulation. He realized that the voice in the cell had been the same voice that ordered the execution. "You," Gohan said. His voice was a growl that shook the earth. "You did this." "I merely opened the door," Aizen said. "You walked through it." Gohan clenched his fist. The air around Aizen shattered. The captain's glasses cracked. Aizen's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He realized he might have miscalculated the boy's retention of self. "I'm going to kill you," Gohan said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. But before Gohan could move, a black garganta opened behind him. A massive hand reached out. It was a menos grande, but the size of a mountain. It grabbed Gohan, not to attack him, but to pull him. The resonance of his power was pulling the Hueco Mundo to him. The dimension itself was trying to claim him. Gohan struggled. He flared his energy to break the grip, but the space around him was unstable. The reality broke. Gohan was sucked into the void, dragged into the world of hollows. The garganta closed. The sky began to knit itself back together. The silence returned to the Soul Society. The survivors looked at the empty space where the boy had been. The Seireitei was in ruins. The Central 46 was dead, again. The barrier was shattered, and the strongest being in existence had just been pulled into the realm of the monsters, carrying the power of the execution bird inside him. The small choice to submit to judgment had resulted in the massive outcome of the total destabilization of the Soul Society and Gohan's corruption by the Sokyoku. He was now in Hueco Mundo, and he was hungry again. But this time, there were plenty of souls to eat. Aizen looked to the closed sky. He began to laugh. He had lost his toy, but he had gained a chaos that would keep the Royal Guard busy for a century. The war had changed. It was no longer Shinigami versus Hollow. It was everyone versus Gohan. The sands of Hueco Mundo were usually cold, reflecting the endless night of the dimension. But where Gohan walked, the white dunes turned into rivers of molten glass. He was no longer the boy who had arrived in the Soul Society. The absorption of the Sokyoku had changed his physiology. His skin was harder, shimmering with a faint, iridescent layer of spirit pressure that acted as a perpetual armor. His hair, once black, now settled into a permanent pale gold, glowing softly against the dark sky. He did not need to breathe, but every time his chest rose and fell, the atmospheric pressure in the desert shifted, creating windstorms that howled for miles. He was walking without a destination. The instinct that drove him was simple and terrifying. He was hungry, but this was not the hunger for food. It was the hunger of the phoenix inside him, demanding fuel to sustain the impossible fusion of Saiyan biology and executioner flame. The hollows of the desert, creatures of instinct and hunger themselves, fled before him. They felt the predator. They felt a being that did not just consume souls, but incinerated existence. Even the ajukas, the giant, intelligent hollows that commanded parts of the desert, buried themselves deep under the sand to hide. Gohan was alone in a world of monsters, and he was the monster they feared. He reached a forest of quartz trees. The Menos Grande, standing guard there, looked down at the tiny figure. It fired a chero, a massive blast of red energy. Gohan did not dodge. He kept walking. The red beam hit his shoulder and splashed harmlessly like water hitting a hot skillet. Gohan reached up, grabbed the leg of the giant Menos, and pulled. The structure of the forest collapsed as the mountain-sized creature was slammed into the quartz floor. Gohan placed a hand on the creature's mask. He didn't want to do it. He hated it. But the fire in his chest screamed. He drained the Menos in seconds. The giant body crumbled to dust. Gohan stood in the cloud of ash, tears streaming down his face, sizzling as they hit his burning skin. He apologized to the dust. Back in the Soul Society, the ruins of the Seireitei were a hive of desperate activity. The loss of the central districts and the death of the Central 46 had created a power vacuum that Captain Commander Yamamoto filled with martial law. He stood in the wreckage of the first squad barracks, his left arm bandaged, his face a mask of granite. The report from the Department of Research and Development was grim. The dimensional tear Gohan had created was not healing. It was bleeding. The sheer mass of spiritual pressure Gohan possessed was warping the gravity of the worlds. If he was left unchecked in Hueco Mundo, his growing density would eventually cause the dimensions to collide. The Soul Society would be crushed by the weight of the hollow world. Yamamoto made the decision that no one else could make. This was not a rescue mission. It was an extermination. He assembled the remaining captains, Unohana, Byakuya, Kenpachi, and Shunsui. They were the war potential. Aizen was notably absent, having claimed he was securing the perimeter of the Spirit King's palace, a lie that everyone was too busy to question. Yamamoto looked at his captains. He told them the truth. The boy was a tragedy, but he was also a cancer. They had to cut him out before he killed the host. Kenpachi grinned, his bells ringing in the silence. He didn't care about the politics. He just wanted to finish the fight that had been interrupted. Byakuya remained silent, his hand resting on his sword. He thought of the promise he had made to his parents to protect the order of the clan and the society. The boy threatened that order. It was a simple equation. Using a forbidden Kido technique powered by the collective reiatsu of the Kido core, they ripped open a garganta. The pathway to Hueco Mundo stabilized. The expedition force stepped into the void. They did not travel through the precipice world. They were projected directly to the source of the gravity distortion. They arrived in the white desert, right in the center of the glass ocean Gohan had created. Gohan sat on a throne of twisted quartz. He had not built it. He had found the ruins of an ancient palace, Las Noches, and the current king of Hueco Mundo, a skeleton emperor named Baragan, had sat there. Baragan was gone. Gohan had not killed him, but simply existed near him. The Saiyan's aura of life and fire was the antithesis of Baragan's aspect of senescence and rot. The king had fled his own palace, unable to withstand the presence of a being who refused to die. Gohan sat with his head in his hands. He felt the captains arrive. He recognized their energies. He felt the sharp, cold pride of Byakuya. He felt the wild, jagged edge of Kenpachi. He felt the burning sun of Yamamoto. He stood up. The quartz throne shattered. He walked out to the balcony of the palace. Below him, on the white sand, the captains of the Gotei 13 stood in formation. They looked small. They looked like toys. Gohan floated down. He didn't flare his aura. He didn't need to. The air around him distorted naturally. He landed 50 yards away from them. Yamamoto stepped forward. He tapped his cane on the glass ground. The flames of Ryujinjaka began to rise, turning the air into an inferno. He spoke to Gohan. He told him that he had committed crimes against the balance of existence. He told him that his life was a threat to the Soul King. He asked Gohan to surrender, to be sealed for eternity in the lowest level of the Mukan, the only place that might contain him. Gohan looked at the old man. He looked at the flames. He remembered the heat of the Sokyoku. He remembered the pain. He shook his head. He told them he couldn't go back to a cage. He said the cage made him crazy. He said the darkness made him hungry. He asked them to leave. He said he would stay here. He would eat the bad monsters. He would be the king of the empty world. It was a child's logic applied to a god's dilemma. Yamamoto did not argue. He released his Shikai. All things in the universe turned to ash. The wave of fire swept toward Gohan. It was a fire that had incinerated armies. Gohan raised his hand. He didn't use a barrier. He used a ki-ai. He shouted. The shockwave of his voice hit the wall of fire. The flames were blown backward. The physics of the Saiyan voice, the sheer displacement of air, overpowered the magical fire. The flames scattered, singing the robes of the captains. Kenpachi didn't wait for orders. He laughed, a sound of pure joy, and launched himself at Gohan. He removed his eye patch immediately. The gold skull of his reiatsu rose into the sky. He swung his jagged sword with 2 hands, putting every ounce of his physical strength into the blow. Gohan caught the blade. This time, he didn't catch it with his fingers. He caught it with his forearm. The blade bit into his skin. Blood flowed. It was the first time Gohan had bled in months. The pain was sharp and real. It woke him up. Gohan looked at the blood. He looked at Kenpachi's manic face. Something inside Gohan snapped. The restraint he had been holding on to, the fear of hurting others, evaporated. If they wanted a monster, he would show them what a monster was. He punched Kenpachi. It wasn't a technique. It was a raw release of kinetic energy. Kenpachi's ribcage collapsed. The captain flew backward, crashing through the walls of Las Noches, burying himself deep in the foundation of the palace. He didn't get up. Byakuya moved. Bankai. Senbonzakura Kagayoshi. The ground exploded into millions of cherry blossom blades. They swirled around Gohan, a pink hurricane of death. Gohan stood in the center. The blades cut him. Thousands of tiny cuts appeared on his armor, on his face. He closed his eyes. He flared his ki. The golden aura expanded explosively. The cherry blossoms were vaporized. The heat of the aura was so intense that Byakuya's sword hilts became too hot to hold. Byakuya flash-stepped back. His hands burned. Shunsui Kyoraku appeared from the shadow of Gohan's own feet. It was a masterstroke of assassination. He plunged his blades toward Gohan's neck. Gohan spun. His reflexes were faster than light. He grabbed Shunsui by the face. He slammed the captain into the glass ground. The impact created a crater a mile wide. Shunsui coughed blood. His ribs shattered. Gohan raised a fist to finish him. "Stop!" The voice cut through the roar of the battle. It was Unohana. She had not drawn her sword. She walked towards Gohan through the pressure. She was healing herself constantly just to survive the proximity to him. She looked at him with sad eyes. She told him to look at what he was doing. She told him he was killing the only people who had tried to understand him. She reminded him of Ukitake. She reminded him of the books. Gohan froze. His fist hovered inches from Shunsui's face. The gold in his eyes flickered. He looked around. He saw the broken bodies of the captains. He saw the devastation. The rage began to recede, replaced by a crushing guilt. He stepped back. He let Shunsui go. He grabbed his own head. He started to scream. He told them to get away. He told them he couldn't control it. High above the battlefield, a tear in the sky opened. Sosuke Aizen stepped out. He was floating, looking down at the chaos. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment of emotional fracture, the moment when the subject's will broke. He held the Hogyoku in his hand. It was glowing purple. Aizen spoke. His voice was amplified by Kido. He told Gohan that the Soul Society had rejected him. He told Gohan that he was alone, but he didn't have to be. Aizen offered him a place. He offered him a purpose. He told Gohan that together they could rewrite the laws of the world so that beings like them didn't have to hide. Gohan looked up at Aizen. He recognized the man, the liar, the manipulator, the one who had put him on the cross. The rage returned, but this time it was cold. It was focused. Gohan bent his knees. The glass ground shattered into dust. He launched himself at Aizen. Aizen smiled. He shattered Kyoka Suigetsu. Absolute hypnosis. Suddenly, Gohan wasn't in Hueco Mundo. He was back in the Cell Games arena. He saw Cell standing in front of him. But it wasn't Cell. It was Goku, his father. Goku was looking at him with disappointment. Goku was telling him that he had failed, that he was weak. Gohan swung his fist at the vision. He punched his father. The image shattered, replaced by Chi-Chi. She was screaming at him. Gohan swung again. He was fighting ghosts. He was fighting his own trauma. In reality, Gohan was thrashing in the sky, firing massive blasts of energy into the empty air. Each blast was enough to destroy a country. The aim was erratic. One blast hit the ground near the fallen captains. Yamamoto stepped in front of it. He used his own body as a shield. The explosion burned the captain commander badly. He fell to one knee, his shihakusho in tatters. Aizen watched with satisfaction. He was collecting data on the psychological triggers of the Saiyan. He prepared to activate the Hogyoku to fuse with the distracted boy. He descended slowly. But Aizen had made a miscalculation. He had forgotten the one variable that always disrupted his plans. Ichigo Kurosaki was not part of this timeline yet, but the spirit of defiance was not unique to him. Rukia Kuchiki had stowed away on the expedition. She had been hiding in the Garganta, terrified, watching the slaughter. But seeing her brother bleeding, seeing Ukitaki's friend Shunsui crushed, seeing the boy she had shared persimmons with being tortured by illusions, she moved. She didn't attack Aizen. She couldn't. She flew toward Gohan. She shouted his name. She shouted it with every ounce of her spirit energy. She shouted about the persimmons. She shouted about the rain. She shouted about the fact that he was kind. The sound of her voice pierced the hypnosis. Not because she was powerful, but because she was real. Her reiatsu was weak, unthreatening, and grounded. It was a tether to reality in a storm of hallucinations. Gohan stopped thrashing. The image of his angry mother faded. He saw Rukia floating in front of him, tears in her eyes, holding her sword not as a weapon, but as a barrier between him and the madness. Gohan blinked. The silver light left his eyes. They returned to teal. He saw Aizen hovering behind Rukia, preparing to strike her to get to him. Gohan moved. He didn't punch. He teleported. He appeared between Rukia and Aizen. He took the slash of Aizen's sword across his chest. The blade cut deep, drawing blood. But Gohan didn't flinch. He grabbed the blade. He looked Aizen in the eyes. "You are not my father," Gohan said quietly. He headbutted Aizen. The sound was like a planet cracking. Aizen's nose shattered. His glasses disintegrated. The shockwave threw the traitor captain backward, skipping him across the atmosphere of Hueco Mundo like a stone on water. The Hogyoku fell from Aizen's hand. Gohan caught it. He looked at the small purple orb. He felt its desire. It wanted to grant his wish. It asked him what he wanted. Did he want to go home? Did he want to bring his father back? Did he want to rule this world? Gohan looked at the ruin below. He looked at the injured captains. He looked at Rukia. He realized that as long as he was here, as long as he had this power, there would be war. Aizen would return. The Soul Society would return. He was the magnet for disaster. "I want to be alone," Gohan whispered to the orb. The Hogyoku pulsed. It granted the wish, but not by moving him, by changing the world around him. Gohan crushed the Hogyoku in his hand. He didn't use it. He broke it. The release of energy was cataclysmic. Aizen, recovering in the distance, screamed in horror as his master plan shattered into purple dust. The energy from the broken Hogyoku mixed with Gohan's Sokoku-infused Kai. It created a barrier, a wall of rejection. Gohan pushed his hands out. A sphere of absolute force expanded from his body. It pushed Aizen out of Hueco Mundo, flinging him back into the Dangai. It pushed the captains and Rukia back into the Garganta, sealing them inside the pathway to the Soul Society. Rukia reached out for him as the dimensional door closed. She saw Gohan standing alone in the sky of the hollow world. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his hands. He looked sad. He looked like a child again. "Goodbye," he mouthed. The Garganta snapped shut. The connection was severed. The Soul Society expedition team crashed onto the pavement of the Seireitei. They were battered, broken, and defeated. Yamamoto lay unconscious. Kenpachi was in a coma. Byakuya could barely stand. They had failed to kill the boy. They had failed to capture him. But the threat was gone. The sensors in the Department of Research and Development went silent. Hueco Mundo was no longer readable. A barrier of impenetrable density had surrounded the entire dimension. Nothing could get in. Nothing could get out. The gravity wave stabilized. The bleeding stopped. In the white desert, silence returned. The wind died down. The glass sand cooled. Gohan landed on the ruins of Las Noches. He was alone, truly alone. The hollows were gone, driven deep underground by the barrier. Aizen was gone. The Shinigami were gone. Gohan sat on the edge of the broken wall. He pulled his knees to his chest. He looked at the two moons in the sky. He wondered if they were the same moons his father saw. He realized he would probably never know. He had saved them by exiling himself. He had become the warden of the empty world. He felt a presence. A small, white creature peeked out from behind a quartz pillar. It was a small hollow, a childlike thing with a mask that looked like a skull helmet. It was Nell too. She looked at the golden boy with big, fearful eyes. She sensed that he was sad. She sensed that he wasn't going to eat her. Gohan looked at her. He didn't flare his energy. He forced himself to breathe, to lower his power, to make himself small. It hurt. It felt like holding his breath underwater. But he did it. The golden glow faded to a dull shimmer. "Hello," Gohan said softly. Nell blinked. "Hello," she lisped. Gohan smiled. It was a weak, broken smile. But it was real. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a god. He was just Gohan, and he had a long time to wait. The narrative of the timeline where Gohan entered the Bleach universe ends not with a victory parade, but with a silent stalemate. The Soul Society would rebuild, forever wary of the golden demon locked in the other world. Aizen would retreat to the shadows, forced to find a new path to power without the Hogyoku, his timeline set back by decades. And Gohan would grow up in the White Desert, the strongest being in the universe, learning that the hardest battle was not destroying the enemy, but living with himself. The convergence was complete. The worlds were separate. The cost was paid. The official records of the Seireitei mark the incident, not as a war, but as a natural disaster. They call it the solar displacement. For 10 years following the exile, the barrier around Hueco Mundo remained absolute. No garganta could open. No hollows crossed into the world of the living. The balance of souls was maintained not by the routine purification of the Shinigami, but by the sheer gravitational pressure of the entity locked on the other side. The Department of Research and Development monitored the dimensional wall continuously. They did not look for breaches. They looked for the pulse. As long as the golden rhythm remained steady, the worlds were safe. The fear of the Arrancar, the fear of Aizen, all of it was swallowed by the greater fear of waking the dragon. Captain Commander Yamamoto ordered the permanent sealing of the records regarding Son Gohan. To the younger generation of Soul Reapers, the Golden Demon became a myth, a bedtime story about a star that fell to earth and burned away the evil spirits. But the veterans remembered. Captain Ukitake spent his remaining years writing letters that he could never send, dropping them into the swirling currents of the Dangai in the hopes they might drift to the White Desert. Rukia Kuchiki rose through the ranks with a grim determination. She refused to use her bankai unless absolutely necessary, haunting the reconstructed walls of the Seireitei. She often looked at the moon, touching the scar on her spirit where the boy's kindness had been ripped away. She understood now that true strength was not about winning. It was about enduring the cost of the victory. Sosuke Aizen remained in the shadows of the fifth squad. The destruction of the Hogyoku had set his ambitions back by centuries. Without the shortcut to evolution, his plan to overthrow the Soul King was stalled indefinitely. He was forced to return to the role of the loyal captain, his smile now brittle and hiding a deep, festering caution. He knew that if he pushed too hard, if he created another imbalance, the Warden of Hueco Mundo might return. Aizen, the man who wanted to be a god, lived in fear of the boy who just wanted to be human. The narrative of the universe had been derailed. Ichigo Kurosaki was born into a peaceful Karakura town, a substitute Soul Reaper with no hollows to fight, a hero without a war. The conflict that should have defined the age was strangled in the cradle. In the White Desert, time moved differently. The boy became a man. He sat on the highest spire of Las Noches, wearing a cloak made of the scavenged armor of the quartz forest. He was the shepherd of the lost. The intelligent hollows, led by the child Nell, lived in his shadow, free from the endless hunger that used to drive them. Gohan did not train anymore. He did not need to. He simply existed, a living reactor keeping the dimensions apart. He watched the stars of the fall sky. He remembered a name, Goku. He remembered a promise, to be good. In the silence of the eternal night, the Golden King closed his eyes, finally at peace with the quiet, guarding the door so that no one else would ever have to lose their father again. The timeline was closed.